Hey everyone, welcome to the show. So, I have really interesting early voting news to share with you. I have some uplifting polls and stats. I also have news about Donald Trump's DJT stock taking another hit this week. So, I'm going to start there. DJT stock, which of course is the stock for his failing social media site, Truth Social, seemed to be defying the odds. So, throughout October, after hitting an all-time low of $11.75 in September, it rebounded. It was back up to almost $55 a share. Still a lot lower than the all-time high of almost $80, but it was pretty much, back to normal, quite a comeback. It was back trading basically where it was in the summer. Well, reality seems to be finally setting in that Trump could very well lose this election. And so it started to show in the stock performance this week. So the share price dropped 22.3% on one day alone. That was on Wednesday. And it just continued to decline. It continued to decline yesterday and then again today. As you see here, the stock dropped all the way down to $30.05 in midday trading. And then it settled out. It was still in the $30 range. So it was still less than $31 a share. And I think that they halted the trading because it just wasn't changing after a while. So that happens when it becomes too volatile. So there you go. That's where it's at, and doesn't seem to be moving in the right direction for him as election day approaches, which is a good indicator. And it kind of follows the trends that we're seeing in that poly market thing that I was talking about, where people are literally betting on the election. So there's been a lot more movement towards Kamala Harris in the betting markets as well. Not a good sign for Trump. So next up, I'm going to go through the early voting data. You'll understand what has DJT investors a bit nervous. So here's the deal with all of this. As of today, almost 65 million people had voted. That was as of this morning, and that's either by mail or in person. When I checked the stats last night, just over 1.7 million ballots have been cast in Arizona. 34% coming from Democrats, 42% from Republicans, and 24% from other voters. Women in that state had cast 48% of the votes. Men submitted 43%. 9% did not specify a gender. And as you all know, this gender gap is really important because Harris is winning female voters by double digits over Trump. And here's something of concern in regard to Arizona. This is, again, a very important battleground state. So according to an NBC News analysis, there's been a surge of new male voters this year, meaning men who, for whatever reason, did not cast a ballot in 2020, but they're voting this year. So that 9% that didn't specify their gender, that could be very crucial. It could be a determining factor, not just in the state, but in the overall race, because Arizona is, again, very important. Depending on what other states Kamala Harris wins, she might need Arizona. And Joe Biden barely won that state. Over in Georgia, more than 3.6 million ballots have been received as of last night, 45% from Democrats, 48% from Republicans, and 7% from other voters. In regard to the gender split there, 56% of the votes have come from women, 44% from men, so 12% gap. And here's some exciting news. So according to an analysis conducted by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and also a group called Georgia Votes, 613,000 of those votes cast in Georgia have come from people who didn't vote in 2020 in that state. So they said this includes young voters who obviously weren't old enough to vote 4 years ago, people who moved back to Georgia now who were in a different state, also people who've been registered, some for decades, but for whatever reason, they did not vote in 2020. Of this 613,000, The majority are white, so 53.51%. And then the next largest group is Black voters at 24.94%. This is the part that's really interesting, though. Young people make up a plurality of this batch of new voters. So not a majority, but they're the largest block of new voters. 18 to 29-year-olds in this state accounted for 35.32% of those 613,000 votes of people who are just newly casting a ballot this year. So that's very exciting because, again, younger people tend to skew more Democratic. Depends, though, we've seen younger women skewing more Democratic, younger men skewing more Republican. But again, we're seeing far more turnout among women, so this is a good sign. What I'm hoping is that the Georgia State Supreme Court ruling about abortion, which maintained the state's moronic, lethal 6-week abortion ban, I am hoping that that has more people fired up, that they're coming out to vote against this MAGA extremist party. So we'll see. We'll see how the numbers shake out. And up in Michigan, there have been just over, or at least as of last night, just over 2.4 million ballots cast. 47% from Democrats, 42% from Republicans, and 11% from other voters. As with other states, women are out in force, so you've got 55% of Michigan ballots coming from women, 45% from men, so another double-digit lead there. Nevada, they have received more than 887,000 ballots, or at least that was as of last night. 35% from Democrats, 39% from Republicans, 26% from others. This state continues to be an outlier with the gender split. So 44% of the votes have been submitted by women, 45% from men, 11% who did not specify. We'll see how that shakes out and if those others, help to minimize the damage in that state. I mean, it's still very close in polling between Trump and Harris. Over in North Carolina, just over 3.6 million votes have been cast as of last night. 33% from Democrats, 34% from Republicans, 33% from other voters. So the party affiliation has really not changed. It's been really steady across the board. But women, again, really killing it in North Carolina. So 55% of the votes have come from women, 44% from men, so another double-digit lead for women. And as for the very crucial state of Pennsylvania, I have some really important information here. More than 1.6 million votes have been cast as of last night, 58% from Democrats, 32% from Republicans, and 10% from other voters. There is a sizable gender gap in this state. 56% of the ballots have come from women, 43% from men. 13% gap there. And check this out. So according to a Politico analysis of the early vote, female Democrats accounted for 1/3 of the voters who cast a ballot this year in that state, but didn't vote in 2020. So of the new voters, 1/3 are women. So that is, again, a good sign, and they're Democrats. So then an NBC News report showed that all of the new female voters this year, again, in Pennsylvania, of those new voters, Democrats outnumber Republicans by almost 2-1. So in other words, of this pool of people who are new voters, who for whatever reason did not vote in 2020, for every one Republican that is new Republican woman, I should say, there are nearly 2 Democratic new voting women casting a ballot this year. So very good sign. So, again, whether these are young females who weren't eligible in 2020 or women who just sat out the last election, something has them fired up this year. I mean, we all know what that something is. And this is why Trump is already whining about voter fraud in Pennsylvania. This is why he knows he screwed himself with that hate rally that he did last weekend, and then he sees these early voting numbers, these early polling numbers. He knows they're not looking good for him. So we'll see. Again, anything could shift over the weekend, could shift on the day of the election, but so far it's looking good. So let's look at Wisconsin. This is the last of our battleground states. So just over 1.2 million ballots have been received as of last night, 35% from Democrats, 24% from Republicans, a whopping 41% in this state from other voters. These are people who are not affiliated with either major political party. So it could be for third-party candidates, it could be independents. We won't know until things shake out. Of those votes cast, 51% have come from women, 43% from men, and 6%, did not specify their gender. Going back to the female vote disparity, though, there's been a lot of reporting on this. So Politico's analysis showed that Black and Hispanic women under the age of 30 are voting at higher rates than the men in that same age group. So compared to Black and Hispanic men under 30, women are voting at a much higher rate and by a much wider margin than what we saw in 2020. So yes, these same women, these Black and Hispanic women, were voting more so, in greater numbers in 2020 than the men. But this year, there's an even bigger gap gender-wise. Part of the reason is that there's a progressive female organization. It's called Supermajority. They have been busting their asses. They've been working to try to turn out female voters, and it's working. Because according to Politico and the Supermajority, there are 3.6 million women who are considered low propensity voters. More than 1/3 of those women have already voted in this election. So think about that. 3.6 million, more than 1/3 have already voted. So more than a million, like 1.5 million, have already voted in this election. And these are women that are not prone to come out and vote. These aren't women who, oh yeah, they vote in every election, right? Again, low propensity voters. So that's all good news. Here is even more good news. There was a recent NAACP poll that showed that Trump's support among Black men is dropping. So in a poll that they conducted last month, 27% of Black men under the age of 50 were supporting Donald Trump. This month, they conducted the same poll. That number has now dropped to 21%. And then when they polled Black voters in general, support for Trump dropped from 13% to 11%. So basically, it's back to where it was in 2020. And over this same period of time, in the past month, support for Kamala Harris with Black voters jumped from 51 to 59%, or sorry, I should say this was 51 to 59% Black men under 50. And then in regard to Black voters overall, her support jumped 10%. So it is now at 73%. Now, unfortunately, Barack Obama received like 95% of the Black vote. That was in both of his presidential campaigns, 2008 and 2012. And then Biden received about 90% of the vote. The NAACP president, though, told Politico he's not worried about it. He's confident that Harris' support will be greater than what we're seeing in the polls, because he said that as what they're finding is consistent with other elections, that the closer we get to the election, the more people are paying attention, the more people start to educate themselves on what's going on, what's at stake. So we'll see if that pans out. We'll see next week. I have more good news to share. This is from a Gallup survey. Democrats are far more enthused to vote this year than Republicans by a 10% margin. So 77% of Dems said they're more enthused this year than in previous elections. 67% of Republicans said the same thing. And then there's a Harvard Law School instructor who posted this Gallup poll that I just mentioned. She posted on social media, and she says pollsters are not capturing the female voting surges properly. So this is Alejandra Caraballo. Anyway, she posted, quote, "The polls are seriously missing something along gender lines, and it's distorting the results. I've dug into crosstabs on state level polling, and gender is completely off." I am also going to leave a link for you guys down in the description box on YouTube and the podcast. This video is there's a woman who you'll see speaking. She's a former professor of political science. She is reading the email excerpts from a man who's been knocking on doors in Pennsylvania, in the very critical area of Bucks County, Pennsylvania. So the feedback he gives is very uplifting. And as her video title says, his feedback tells a very different story from what we're seeing in the polls. So be sure to check that out. Like I said, the link will be in the description box below this video on YouTube and below the audio on the podcast. And it should be everywhere you get your podcasts. So no matter what platform you're on, Apple Podcast, Google, YouTube Podcast, Spotify, it should be on every platform. But if not, check another one. So anyway, I will let you guys know when I hear more, but good stuff happening, it seems. So we'll see. Again, we can't get too cocky. We have to get out and vote because Republicans are very known to show up on the day of the election and they could wipe out all these gains. So do what you got to do, Diablo. Get out there, vote, vote, vote as if women's lives depend on it, because it absolutely does. All right. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. Please like, please share and subscribe. Please donate if you can. Love you all. Take care. Talk with you soon.